The gleaming towers of MediaCorp studios pierced the Los Angeles skyline like steel needles threading through morning smog. In the executive parking garage, a modest Honda Civic pulled into a spot between a gleaming Mercedes and a pristine Tesla. The contrast was striking, like a wildflower growing between marble pillars. Marcus Reed stepped out of the Civic, adjusting his simple navy blazer. At 42, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had found peace with who he was. His weathered hands spoke of years spent in construction before Hollywood discovered him, and his eyes held a depth that cameras couldn't quite capture. Despite being one of the most bankable stars in the industry, Marcus drove himself to interviews, carried his own coffee, and treated every person he met, from janitors to executives, with the same genuine respect. The elevator ride to the 34th floor was silent, except for the soft jazz playing overhead. Marcus closed his eyes briefly, offering a quiet prayer as he always did before public appearances. It wasn't for success or good reviews. It was simply for wisdom, for the right words, and for the courage to remain true to himself, no matter what questions came his way. The elevator dinged softly as it reached the studio level. Marcus stepped into a world of controlled chaos, assistants rushing with clipboards, technicians adjusting lighting, and the electric energy that always preceded a live taping. The Marcus Reed who emerged from that elevator was the same man who had entered it, but the world around him was preparing to test that consistency. "Mr. Reed!" A young production assistant with perfectly styled hair and nervous energy approached him. "I'm Jamie. We spoke on the phone. Thank you so much for doing the show. Mr. Blackwood is really excited to have you on." Marcus smiled warmly. "Thank you for having me, Jamie. I'm looking forward to it." As they walked through the maze of corridors lined with promotional posters and awards, Jamie chattered nervously about ratings, demographics, and the show's recent Emmy nominations. Marcus listened politely, but his attention was drawn to the framed photographs lining the walls, celebrities laughing with the host, political figures in heated debates, musicians performing intimate acoustic sets. It was a gallery of controlled intimacy, moments crafted for consumption. They paused outside a heavy oak door marked Executive Producer. Jamie knocked twice before pushing it open. "Mr. Blackwood, Marcus Reed is here for you." The office was a shrine to success. Awards gleamed from every surface. Photographs with A-list celebrities covered one entire wall, and floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of the city below. Behind a desk that could have doubled as a small aircraft carrier sat Vincent Blackwood, the man who had transformed late-night television from simple entertainment into cultural warfare. Blackwood was everything Marcus wasn't. Sharp-edged where Marcus was gentle, calculating where Marcus was sincere, performance where Marcus was authenticity. His silver hair was styled to look effortlessly tousled, his suit was tailored to precision, and his smile was as bright and artificial as studio lighting. "Marcus Reed!" Blackwood stood, arms spread wide in a gesture of false intimacy. "The man of the hour. Please sit down. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water? Something stronger?" "Water would be great, thank you." Marcus settled into the leather chair across from Blackwood's desk, maintaining his natural posture despite the overwhelming opulence around him. Blackwood pressed a button on his desk. "Linda, bring us some water, the good stuff from France." He turned back to Marcus with that practiced smile. "So Marcus, I have to say, I'm fascinated by you. Really fascinated. You're this enigma in Hollywood, hugely successful, but you keep such a low profile. No scandals, no Twitter feuds, no public meltdowns. It's almost suspicious." Marcus chuckled softly. "I suppose I just prefer to let my work speak for itself." "But that's just it." Blackwood leaned forward, his eyes lighting up with the predatory gleam of someone who had found an angle. "Your work does speak, and it speaks volumes. 3 of the highest-grossing films of the decade, critical acclaim across the board, and yet you remain this mysterious figure. The public is dying to know who the real Marcus Reed is." Linda entered with a crystal water pitcher and glasses, setting them down with practiced efficiency before disappearing as silently as she had arrived. Marcus poured himself a glass, noting how even the water service was designed to impress rather than simply serve. "I'm not sure there's much mystery to it," Marcus said, taking a sip. I'm just a guy who loves making movies and tries to live a good life. Ah, but there's the rub. Blackwood's voice took on the theatrical tone that had made him famous. What exactly does a good life mean to Marcus Reed? Because I've done my homework, and there are some very interesting patterns in your choices. The roles you take, the causes you support, the events you attend, or more tellingly, the ones you don't attend. Marcus felt a familiar stirring in his chest, the quiet alertness that came when his faith was about to be challenged. He had faced this moment in boardrooms, at parties, and in countless interviews over the years. The world always wanted to categorize him, to reduce his beliefs to sound bites or scandal. I try to choose projects that align with my values, Marcus said simply. I think most people do that in their work. Values. Blackwood repeated the word like he was tasting wine. Now we're getting somewhere, because your values seem to be quite traditional, shall we say, almost anachronistic in today's Hollywood. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Marcus recognized the setup, the way Blackwood was circling his true target. This wasn't going to be a conversation about films or craft. This was going to be an interrogation about belief. I wouldn't call treating people with respect and trying to make a positive impact anachronistic, Marcus replied calmly. Those seem like pretty timeless values to me. Blackwood laughed, but there was no warmth in it. Come on, Marcus, we both know what we're dancing around here. You're a person of faith, a Christian specifically. In Hollywood, it's like being a vegetarian at a barbecue convention. Marcus took another sip of water, buying himself a moment to choose his words carefully. My faith is important to me. Yes, it guides how I try to live my life and treat others. And that's beautiful, it really is, Blackwood said, his tone dripping with condescension. Very inspiring. But here's the thing, Marcus, and I'm going to be straight with you because I respect you. We need to be smart about how we handle this on the show tonight. The word handle hung in the air like smoke from a gun. Marcus felt his spine straighten slightly, though his expression remained calm. What do you mean by handle? Blackwood stood and walked to his wall of windows, gazing out at the city below with the air of a general surveying a battlefield. Look, Marcus, I like you. I really do. You're talented, you're professional, and you've got this whole humble thing down pat. But my audience, they're sophisticated, they're progressive. They're not going to connect with some born-again narrative. I'm not here to preach, Marcus said quietly. I'm here to talk about my new film. Exactly. Blackwood spun around, pointing at Marcus like he'd just solved a complex equation. That's exactly right. We're here to talk about your film, your craft, your journey as an artist. We don't need to get bogged down in theological discussions. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. Are you asking me to hide who I am? I'm asking you to be strategic. Blackwood returned to his desk, leaning forward with the intensity of a man accustomed to getting his way. Look, if someone asks you directly about your faith, which they won't because I control the questions, you can give some vague answer about spirituality or finding meaning through art. Keep it universal, keep it accessible, don't alienate people with specifics. The silence that followed was heavy with tension. Marcus stared at Blackwood, seeing not just one man but an entire system that wanted to sand down anything that didn't fit its predetermined mold. This wasn't about protecting his career or appealing to audiences. This was about the fundamental question of whether he was willing to deny the most important part of himself for the sake of acceptance. And if I don't agree to that? Marcus asked, his voice still calm but with an edge of steel that hadn't been there before. Blackwood's smile faltered for just a moment before snapping back into place. Well, I'd hate for us to have a problem, Marcus. Really hate it, because problems tend to snowball in this industry. One day you're the golden boy, the next day you're the guy who's difficult to work with. You know how it goes. Marcus knew exactly how it went. He'd watched good people get destroyed for refusing to compromise their principles, seen careers ended with whisper campaigns and closed doors. The entertainment industry was a machine that demanded conformity, and it had countless ways to punish those who refused to bend. Let me make sure I understand, Marcus said, setting down his water glass with deliberate care. You want me to go on your show and pretend to be someone I'm not. You want me to hide the foundation of who I am, the source of whatever good I might do in this world, because it might make some people uncomfortable. I want you to be professional, Blackwood snapped, his mask finally slipping. I want you to understand that this isn't Sunday school. It's show business. We're not here to save souls. We're here to entertain people and sell advertising. And frankly, your particular brand of faith doesn't test well with our demographic. Marcus stood slowly, his movement causing Blackwood to take an involuntary step backward. There was nothing threatening about Marcus's posture, but there was something unshakable in his presence, like a mountain that had decided to assert itself. You know what's interesting, Vincent? Marcus's voice was soft, but it filled the room. In all my years in this business, I've met a lot of people who were afraid. Afraid of failure, afraid of success, afraid of being seen for who they really are. But I've never met anyone as afraid as someone who asks others to hide their truth. Blackwood's face flushed red. I'm not afraid of anything. I'm trying to help you navigate reality. No, Marcus said, shaking his head slowly. You're afraid that if people see someone living authentically, according to principles that go deeper than ratings and focus groups, they might start asking why you're not doing the same. The accusation hit its mark. Blackwood's carefully constructed persona cracked, revealing the insecurity underneath. You self-righteous. I'm not righteous at all, Marcus interrupted gently. I'm just a man trying to follow what I believe is right. And what I believe is that we don't get to choose which parts of ourselves are acceptable to the world. We get to choose whether we're going to be whole people or broken ones. Blackwood slammed his hand on the desk, causing awards and picture frames to rattle. Do you have any idea what you're throwing away? This show reaches 12 million people. This could launch your next film to 100 million opening weekend. And you're going to walk away from that because I asked you to tone down the Jesus talk? Marcus walked to the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. When he turned back, his expression was filled not with anger, but with something far more devastating. Pity. Vincent, do you remember why you got into television in the first place? The question caught Blackwood off guard. For a moment, the calculating executive disappeared, replaced by a confused man who looked like he was trying to remember something from a dream. What does that have to do with anything? I bet it was because you wanted to tell stories that mattered, to connect with people, to make them laugh or think or feel less alone. Am I right? Blackwood's silence was answer enough. When was the last time you did that? Marcus asked gently. When was the last time you used your platform for something that actually mattered to you, instead of just something that would trend on social media? You don't understand how this business works. I understand it perfectly, and I understand that somewhere along the way you forgot that the business is supposed to serve the art, not the other way around. Marcus opened the door. I hope you remember someday, Vincent. I really do. If you walk out that door, you're finished, Blackwood shouted, his composure completely shattered. I have friends at every network, every studio. You'll never work in this town again. Marcus paused in the doorway without turning around. You know, Vincent, I've been finished before. I was finished when I was laying drywall at construction sites and dreaming of making movies. I was finished when I got my first role and everyone said I was too old, too unknown, too ordinary. I was finished when I turned down films that would have made me rich but would have compromised my values. He turned back one final time, and his smile was radiant with the kind of peace that money couldn't buy. But I've never been more alive than when I was willing to lose everything for the sake of staying true to who I am. You can't finish someone who's already free. The sound of the door closing behind Marcus echoed through the office like a gunshot. Blackwood stood alone among his awards and accolades, surrounded by evidence of his success, but feeling more hollow than he had in years. Outside in the hallway, Jamie, the production assistant, was waiting nervously with a clipboard full of interview notes. Mr. Reed, is everything okay? We're supposed to start pre-production meetings in. I won't be doing the interview, Jamie, Marcus said kindly. I'm sorry for any inconvenience that causes. Jamie's face went pale. But the show, Mr. Blackwood will figure it out. He's very good at what he does. Marcus pulled out his phone and scrolled to his agent's number. I need to make a quick call, and then I'm going to head home. As he waited for his agent to pick up, Marcus walked toward the elevator bank. Through the glass walls of the studio offices, he could see the controlled chaos of television production. People running with purpose, lights being adjusted, cameras being positioned. It was a world he had been part of for over a decade, and walking away from it should have felt like loss. Instead, it felt like liberation. Marcus? His agent's voice was sharp with concern. Please tell me you didn't just walk out of the Blackwood interview. I walked out of the Blackwood interview. Jesus Christ, Marcus, do you know what you've just done? Marcus smiled as he pressed the elevator button. I think I do, yeah. This could kill your career. Blackwood has influence everywhere. He could. Helen, Marcus interrupted gently. How long have we worked together? 8 years, and in those 8 years, have I ever made a decision that hurt my career in the long run? There was a pause. No, but this is different. This is me being the same person I've always been. The same person who turned down the superhero franchise because the script glorified violence. The same person who walked away from the romantic comedy because it mocked marriage. The same person who chose indie films over blockbusters when the blockbusters asked me to be someone else. The elevator arrived with a soft ding. As Marcus stepped inside, he could see studio employees gathering in the hallway, whispering and pointing. Word was already spreading that something had gone wrong with the Marcus Reed interview. Those decisions worked out because you were smart about them, Helen said, her voice tight with stress. You found other projects, other opportunities. But this is burning bridges, Marcus. Real ones. Maybe, Marcus acknowledged as the elevator began its descent. Or maybe it's clearing the path for something better. The elevator opened onto the parking garage, and Marcus walked toward his modest Honda Civic. Around him, luxury cars gleamed under fluorescent lights, symbols of success in a city that measured worth in horsepower and monthly payments. I have to go, Helen, but I want you to know that whatever happens next, I'm at peace with this decision. Marcus, wait. He ended the call and slid into his car, taking a moment to sit in the silence. Then he did what he always did in moments of uncertainty. He prayed. Not for his career or his reputation or his next role, but for wisdom, for peace, and for the courage to continue walking the path he believed was right, even when that path led away from everything the world said he should want. As he pulled out of the parking garage and into the bright California sunshine, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in months of carefully managed interviews and strategically chosen public appearances. He felt free. His phone buzzed with a text message, then another, then 10 more in rapid succession. The entertainment news cycle was already churning, turning his quiet exit from a television studio into breaking news. By evening, there would be speculation about feuds, behind-the-scenes drama, and career suicide. By tomorrow, think pieces would be written about the price of principles in Hollywood. But Marcus wasn't thinking about any of that as he drove through the city he had called home for over a decade. He was thinking about a conversation he'd had years earlier with an elderly craftsman on one of his construction crews. Son, the old man had said during a lunch break, you can build a house to impress your neighbors, or you can build a house to shelter your family. But you can't do both. Sooner or later, you have to decide what you're really building for. Marcus had never forgotten those words, and they had guided him through every major decision in his career. Today, he had chosen to build for shelter rather than impression, for authenticity rather than approval, for the person he wanted to be rather than the person the world wanted him to become. 3 hours later, as Vincent Blackwood stood in his office, explaining to network executives why his biggest interview of the month had walked out, Marcus was at home in his modest house in the Hollywood Hills, reading scripts that had been sitting on his desk for weeks. Stories about redemption, about families healing, about ordinary people doing extraordinary things in quiet ways. The scripts weren't from major studios. They wouldn't guarantee opening weekend numbers or international distribution deals. But they were stories that mattered, told by people who understood that the best films didn't just entertain, they illuminated something true about the human experience. As the sun set over Los Angeles, casting long shadows across his living room, Marcus made notes on a screenplay about a teacher in an inner-city school who refused to give up on his students despite a system that had given up on him. It was a small story, told on a small budget by a filmmaker who had been turned down by every major studio in town. It was exactly the kind of project Marcus had been looking for. The next morning, entertainment websites blazed with headlines about the Marcus Reed meltdown and Faith versus Fame, the interview that never happened. Industry insiders speculated about the end of his career, the price of religious extremism in Hollywood, and whether any major studio would risk working with an actor who had burned such a public bridge. But in a small coffee shop in Silver Lake, independent filmmaker Sarah Chen received a phone call that would change her life. "Sarah, this is Marcus Reed. I read your script about the teacher, and I'd love to talk to you about it." 6 months later, The Last Bell premiered at the Sundance Film Festival to standing ovations and critical acclaim. It was a quiet film about loud truths, a small story with a big heart, and it featured the best performance of Marcus Reed's career, not because he was acting, but because he had finally found a role that let him be completely himself. The film won 3 awards at Sundance and was picked up for distribution by a streaming service that specialized in meaningful content over mindless entertainment. It wasn't a blockbuster, but it was something more valuable. It was a film that changed people. Letters poured in from teachers who felt seen, from students who felt inspired, from parents who felt hopeful. The film sparked conversations about education, about dedication, about the quiet heroes who shape our world without seeking recognition. And in his interview for the film's release, when a journalist asked Marcus about his faith and how it influenced his work, he answered honestly and completely, without fear or calculation. "My faith teaches me that we're all connected, that every person has inherent worth, and that the greatest thing we can do is serve something larger than ourselves," he said. "If that comes through in my work, I'm grateful. If it doesn't, I hope the work is still good enough to stand on its own." The interview was shared millions of times, not because it was controversial, but because it was authentic. In a world of calculated responses and media training, Marcus's simple honesty was revolutionary. Vincent Blackwood watched that interview from his office, surrounded by the same awards and photographs that had impressed no one and changed nothing. His show was still successful, still reaching millions of viewers, still generating impressive ratings and advertising revenue. But for the first time in years, he found himself wondering what those millions of viewers were actually getting from their time spent watching. Entertainment? Distraction? Or something deeper that he had forgotten how to provide? That night, Vincent went home to his empty penthouse apartment and did something he hadn't done in decades. He thought about the young man who had once dreamed of using television to make the world a little bit better, a little bit more connected, a little bit more human. And for the first time since Marcus Reed had walked out of his office, Vincent Blackwood began to understand what he had really lost that day. It wasn't a ratings boost or a viral moment or even a successful interview. It was the chance to be in the presence of someone who had chosen wholeness over brokenness, authenticity over performance, and truth over convenience. It was the chance to remember who he used to be before he became who he thought he had to be. In the end, Marcus Reed's refusal to hide his faith didn't end his career. It transformed it. He became known not just as a talented actor, but as someone who proved that success and integrity weren't mutually exclusive, that authenticity was the most powerful performance of all. And sometimes, late at night, when the city was quiet and the lights of Hollywood stretched out below his window, Marcus would think about Vincent Blackwood and pray that someday the man would find his way back to the dreams that had once made him whole. Because that's what faith taught him, that redemption was always possible, that every person was worth believing in, and that the most radical thing you could do in a world of pretense was simply to be who you really were. Even when it cost you everything, especially then,